Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Drawing Down the Dragon. I'm Snappy, and thank you for joining me. Today, I'm joined by my good friend, Druid, Alchemist, lover of the Muse, Veldain. How's it going, Veldain?
Doing pretty good. How's everyone doing? How you doing?
Excited to be here with you. Veldain is a person that I've met through the online community, originally through Almond's streams. And they are someone who's just been really interested in similar things, magic and alchemy and the muse. And we've just connected over the last few months. And so I'm really excited to bring him here for you guys because this is a person who's been dedicated to the magical path for a long time, who has a lot of personal experience and has a lot of wisdom to share. So, really, thank you for coming on, Veldane. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right. So I want to begin by, how did this all begin for you? Do you have any, moments of high strangeness and where you came into the magical tradition, or what brought you into magic? How did you come into this kind of stuff? Did it start when you were
Mm,
young? Did it happen in your teenage years?
it started when I was fairly young. Rough childhood, and I don't know if it was a mental escape or dreams or my mind playing tricks on me just to cope and deal with everything I had been going through that point in my life. But I used to like have these dreams of different. Well, I could never really tell if they were different women, but they had different hair colors, like coming down from the sky and like bringing me things or taking me to this field with a stream running in it.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and in the middle of the stream was an island. On the island was a floating rose. Um, and I never could really make it to the island, but I was always like far away in the field, but close enough that I could see what was that was there. And the field was always beautiful flowers and different tall grasses and probably some grains mixed in there, wild grains of some sort. Um, but I don't know. I just kind of always had this instinctual attunement with nature because that's where I would go to escape just life in
Right,
general, even
right,
just school life. I mean, kids are mean, right? but
right. So you always just
um,
had that active imagination and you cultivated that energy for yourself. So, in that previous vision that you told me about from childhood, how do you interpret this now? Because when I'm listening to that story, it immediately screams to me the Elysian fields, the muses, you trying to get to the magic cup, the cup of Aphrodite, the font of life, it's filled with all this symbolic imagery, and I'm wondering, like, how you now gone through so much learning, how you view this.
well, I would probably view it the same. I came online and started trying to connect and reach out to communities online. Um, oh, 3 or 4 years ago or so, maybe five. I started on Facebook and with like scientific communities, and I was studying different sciences and psychology and matters of the mind and the brain and Carl Jung and other things. It it gave me like a small kind of window into understanding, but it was definitely incomplete, and I wasn't satisfied with the what I would call the quick answer. I always try to
Right.
dig for the underlying answer. Um, and actually, it was the revelation mostly recently has come from you actually, and explaining a lot of things to me and showing me text, not just like saying this is what it is, but here's what I think and here's some sources for you to read. Um, and a lot of it aligns and matches. So it's been very enlightening for me the last couple of years. With,
Right.
with with everyone else that I've spoke to, and just being in places, I think where people don't instantly write you off as being crazy or insane and give you a chance to speak about what you're going through or what you're feeling, and giving, I don't know, how do I say, like responses that are something you can use, other than go smoke another one, no, or whatever. So
Well, yeah, it's one of these things. I mean, the scientific community in general is just so, rapidly grounded within their small framework, right? And that framework
sure.
is very, very, very useful. It's a useful tool,
Hmm.
but it ultimately excludes so much of reality. And what I always like to couch this kind of exploration that we're discussing in, it's like why I was asking for clarification from you about your vision is because ultimately it's your vision, right? It's personal gnosis. I can't verify it for myself, but what I can do is listen to you and contrast it and compare with mine, contrast it and compare with the texts, with the myths, and we can engage it from that symbolic perspective, and we can share. And in the way you've explained your things, it resonates so deeply, and in my mind it's like too often we get caught up in the true or the false, and it's like don't try to pass judgment, just reserve judgment, instead listen to the story, right? And it's an interesting story,
Right.
and you try to understand the story from a symbolic perspective, where it's not about the literal meaning, it's about where these ideas take you. And you find that people are just so much more similar, and people are far less crazy, you know
Yeah,
and
right.
yeah. You know what I mean? It's like we're putting
Yeah,
too
definitely.
much intensity on these things. It's almost not so much like, it's all about where the sign points. It's not about the sign itself, but often people freak out about the sign. You tell people, I had a dream, and they go, how could you trust a dream? And you're like, but I'm trying to explain to you something very important that happened to me, that has all this weight, and they're caught up, but it was a dream, or it came to you when
Yeah.
you were daydreaming in the woods or something, or you heard a voice in your head. Now they've dismissed it outright. It's like,
Oh
stop
yeah,
trying
for
to
sure.
judge whether it's true or false, or just listen to the story. Right? And let's just talk about stories, share an experience. At the end of the day, it's personal gnosis, right? I can't confirm nor deny. And what's beautiful about someone like you, and also about like me, I don't need for you to confirm nor deny for me. And you don't need it.
Right.
You've had these
No,
experiences yourself. You're at this place where you're already here. We can engage in that sharing of experience.
definitely, definitely. And I mean, there's lots of lots of things that had happened to me more recently, very rapidly. Um, I would say I've written about what I call my death, or a death experience I had right here on this couch I'm sitting on now,
Oh,
um,
wow.
in this
What
house.
happened? What
Um,
happened?
Basically, I well, the dream I had, I was in a dark void, floating there, warm and cozy and completely content. And then I heard a woman's voice speaking to me, um, wanting me to come back. And then at first, I think I mentioned this once before, but at first I just kind of laughed, like, no way, no way. I'm like it here, this is nice. And then anything I could think of would just materialize in the void, and I could be there, content with that. I didn't want to go back here at all. But then I woke up on the couch, um, completely like zombie flesh, gray skin, blue fingertips, blue lips, the whole thing completely. Nothing was working. Like my mind was awake and I could see, but I couldn't move. I wasn't breathing. Um, Eventually, I did kind of start being able to get my limbs to move, and I flopped off onto the floor and started slowly crawling my way towards the bathroom. And I got up on my feet about right over there, 5 or 6 feet over there, and I was able to get to my feet. And I was using like walking, pacing back and forth in my living room, like high stepping knee to chest to try to like pump blood through my system. Because I started thinking like, all right, you're think of it like your body's a machine, and how does a computer boot, and what things need to happen, they all happen in sequence. So start going through the startup sequence, and that's what I did. And then I went into the bathroom and I literally watched my face go from like pale gray with blue lips back slowly back to normal. And then everything started balancing out. My heart was racing when it finally, I could feel it beating finally, and then it calmed back down. I had maybe 2 experiences prior to that, a near death and an experience where I was, how do I say, they thought I was dead. I'd gotten in a car accident and I was out cold. And when I finally woke up and I booted the door open and flopped out onto the ground, they were telling me, trying to get me to stop moving, something I could be injured. They were telling me I was no pulse, unresponsive. They were actually readying the jaws of life to try to get me out of that vehicle. That's an instance of was kind of weird. But like I was fine after that, but things started having a snowballing effect after that. Moving forward, because there's a bunch of stuff that went on there in my life, but after the what happened on the couch here was actually happened after I had 3 experiences where somehow at each experience I knew that I just came to me that I was about to be in an intense pain, like that I needed to sit down or lay down, and then I would get the worst headache ever that I've ever experienced. Those 3 headaches, and since then I have experienced, but it was like the sound of bacon frying in my mind. It was intense headaches, but then after they stopped, well, towards the end there would be a loud pop, and then like complete euphoria feeling would wash over me. um, and that
Oh,
happened 3 times, and then I had my experience here on the couch. But I heard, I don't know what it was I heard. It sounded like a chorus of the women singing, just the most beautiful song I can imagine. And even now, when I can meditate and bring up that memory, and I can hear it, and it's like weird stuff starts to happen right after that. when
that
I
sounds like the
recall that
siren
memory.
song. It sounds like the siren song. It brought you to a near death experience. It led to euphoric bliss. Whoa, took you away from yourself? I don't know. That's interesting. That's a totally
A lot
wild
of my
experience. Go ahead, sir.
oh sorry, what a lot of my out of body experiences, and what I would call an inner body experience, because it was
Mm,
weird. Like I leaving my body and I'm seeing myself like float up in the air, and I look down and I can see myself sitting there, and then I just slam like right it back into myself, and then I'm in a memory. At first I didn't know it was a memory until I watched my childhood self come out of my that would be 4th grade classroom to line up in the hall. Um, so that's how they did things there. And my childhood self saw myself, and then the teacher came out right after it. I don't remember her name, but I recognize her face. Um, and then when she looked over, that's when I woke up. And then I had that memory, but not just the memory of the dream, but the memory of seeing the strange bald bearded man in the hallway. That for that split
that's
second.
incredible. Wow. Okay. So I got to talk about a couple things. So, you're an avid lucid dreamer, correct? You know?
I used to be. I
Okay.
feel like I burned my mind out on it. And sometimes I had a dream here recently um, that I was able to take control of, and then wake up from via hearing the bell ring, which is normally how I would do it.
Oh, that's wild. Okay. So yeah, you studied some different techniques then. Okay. With the lucid dreaming, one of the things that I used to experience, or I've experienced several times, is it, people write about it in various forms, but they call them like personal guardians. But this is the unconscious mind trying to prevent you from escaping the dream, from going into a full on out of body experience. And for me, it's always happened when I'm trying to break free of wherever the dream has taken me, like when I'm trying to break free of patterns. This was a big thing when I was a youth, where the dream was like trying to force me to go through these nightmaric experiences, and I didn't want to do it. and it would always result in something far more nightmarish until I eventually learned how to confront all of this kind of stuff. But this was like a huge, massive growth period as a child. I used to have these really bad nightmares. But I also had several experiences where I would try to, in a lucid dream, go out into the stars and go past the moon. And then I was determined I'm going to go into the depths of the dark. And then I would be in there and I would experience what you were describing, being able to be in that play, but eventually what would happen is I would always fall into this dark place of deep fear. And I would usually wake up in a panic, not near death like you were described, but like as if I'd been holding my breath, but yeah,
Coming up from underwater.
Stuff. Yeah, exactly. Coming up from underwater, that's how it felt. And
that's how I've had a couple like that felt like that.
That's wild. And reading about these experiences, it's like, yeah, it seems to be when you're breaking free of the dream, or even greater still, if you're in an out of body experience and you're breaking free of the body entirely, that's when you can fall into these abyss places, and then would be a death in a sense. What do you think?
Yeah, maybe that's what I experienced on the couch when I woke up, and with like a shut down machine, really,
right, like you had gone into the abyss. You had gone into the abyss for too long, but the muse called you back. Like that's how I intuit it.
I have memories of coming back. I've written it down, trying to draw or sketch some of it out, things I saw, and I believe it was me, like literally. You could say coming back, but I felt like it was more of a falling back into the universe. And I have memories of things that I saw, and I remember trying to stay aware and just record mentally what I was seeing, but without objectifying, just looking at what I was seeing and taking mental notes so I could write it down later. But that didn't come until that thought or that memory didn't come until several months later. I was like, I need to write this down. I need to sketch this out. And then I started doing that.
Yeah, dream journaling, I need to get back into that because that's such a powerful habit and it leads to so much more clarity. Yeah, it's so wild. And the other thing you were talking about, it made me think of there's this great writer that I absolutely love named Gary Lockman, and he talks about this, but it's precognitive dreams. He has a whole book on this, and precognitive dreams were actually the first kind of magical experience that I remember having as a youth. And like it kind of led me down that entire path where I would keep having, and I haven't had them so much in recent years, but there were several instances that were like truly nightmarish. What I mean by, well, I'd have these dreams of future events, but what ended up happening to me is eventually the dream and reality would coincide, where then I would enter, though, when that would happen, I'd enter into this kind of loop where like I have this vivid one where I was a young, maybe like 14, and I'm helping my mom like do the dishes and I'm scrubbing a plate. And then I go, I dreamt this, and I'm returned to the dream of scrubbing the plate. And then in the dream, I go, I dreamt this, and I return to I dreamt, and I'm like literally stuck in this loop. And then all of a sudden, my mind shuts down, and I'm frozen. And it felt like I was stuck there for like an infinity. And this has happened to me like several times in my life. And, or just have dreams that then you kind of remember them, but you kind of forget about them until it happens. And then it's like confirmed. And I'm just left going like with the deepest sense, like a light bulb, and this just the deepest sense of deja vu. And 99% of these precognitive dreams are mundane things. Sitting at my desk at school, washing the dishes, folding my laundry, going to the toilet, but it's like, it's always ridiculously weird when it happens. Have you ever had anything like that? Other than the one you were
several times. One time there was someone actually in the room I was in, and we were in mid conversation, and he's the one that brought me back because he would start shaking me. Are you okay? Are you okay? and he was like, you were gone for like 45 seconds, like complete shutdown, like eyes open, staring ahead, stuck in motion, like not saying or doing anything when I was in mid
Wow.
sentence. And it was like a deja vu. I was watching myself sitting at a workstation as an older man, as far as gray hair, gray beard, lab coat on, and working on something. And I was very interesting because I was watching myself, and I like thought it was myself because I think like the person I was watching knew I was there, and like turned and looked up, and that was my angle from like looking above down on them from behind. And when they did that, I got stuck, and that's when I think my whole body just kind of like froze. And my coworker, this happened at work, who was in the room with me talking to me, was trying to shake me out of it. He thought I was stroking out.
Wow. Yeah, well,
I
the way you're
felt
describing it, it sounds exactly like a petit mal seizure, you know? Like, it's wild.
I think deja vu isn't what they describe it as, or other people have described it as, and what any common search would find it as. I think it's a moment where our minds connect across a dimensional barrier to an alternate, well, I don't say dimensional, alternate timeline barrier per se. I know, just to use that to clarify, but and we're actually either viewing something that happened in a timeline that's skewed right next to ours. So that's why everything looks very similar, and you have these deja vu moments. And maybe the only difference would be, instead of scrubbing that plate 5 times before you were satisfied that it was clean, the other one only did it 4 times and then was satisfied that it was clean. And that was the only difference between those two realities, was that one thing.
Oh, that's an interesting
But
thought. Wow. You know, I've
so
always taken it. I mean, what is your perspective on, this is just some because of these precognitive dreams and their regular occurrence throughout my life. And then just, continued magical synchronicity that to the point of like feel like I'm being like I'm not in control and the universe is like mad at me half the time because I'm not doing what it wants me to do, but I'm blessed and being dragged all over the universe, you know? Um and it feels to me almost, well, it is like it just seems so true to me that everything has happened already, that all of life is predetermined, that that I'm even, even though okay, one of the things about predetermined, like believing in fate, is that I also accept the reality of free will, because from our limited perspective, it appears like we have free will. And, with the synchronicities and the muses, I've experienced this thing because of self doubt and anxiety, where I've rejected the offers. I've
yeah,
rejected
been
the
there. I feel
opportunity and
that.
purposely stagnated, so it's like you can, so there's still this, but then when you think about it and meditate it on it, then it's like, no, but that was the determined fate that I chose, I just ruined, I chose not to, but I've always had this sense
Mhm.
that yeah, everything has already happened and that we're kind of replaying the experience. And I don't know, it's just how I've always interpreted it. Now that's not to say that I don't necessarily agree with you, because what you're saying to me, and I wonder if you're familiar with these theories. This is something that I've discussed several times with our dear friend Wretch, is the chaos theory of fractalization, or we exist in that
Mhm.
monad, but that monad is also constantly producing an infinite number of fractals of itself. So we're in this ever descending chaos, and chaos is really the true nature of the one. And so it's constantly generating an infinite number of experiences. So there's ultimately an infinite number of realities. There's a reality in which everything happens, where everything must happen. um, how do you think that relates to what you were experiencing with your time dream and your perception of time?
I would say I would agree with that, but as far as I do feel like we have free will,
Mm,
um, but when we don't play our part on the stage properly, things don't go properly in our lives because we made a choice that didn't continue our role on the stage, or it changes our role in the system per se. Um, and because like when I shucked everything off as it was just all in your head, you're imagining things, and I tried to, you know, be what I thought everyone around me wanted me to be, or society wanted me to be. Things never went well for me. It
Right.
wasn't until I started fully embracing um, what I think a druid is and does, and just through intuition and emotions that I feel in certain moments, the things start getting better for me. And the more I travel down this road, the better things continually get.
That is
Now I'm kind
something
of
that
in a little.
I completely agree with. To me, what you're saying there, that describes the path of Dionysus, becoming the carnival king, embracing that rabid individuality and pursuing your unique experience with wild abandon, embracing the absurdity of life, but taking that leap into the unknown. I feel like, there's just, you have to kind of embrace that kind. I don't know. And for my experience, I've always been a radical outsider. I've always been uncomfortably myself, and have been, just bullied like you were describing, and ostracized for it. And eventually at one point, it's taken me a long time to fully embrace myself, you know. Um and it taken most of my life, in fact, and it's taken
Mhm.
several different initiations and stages. But the more I've come to embrace what I really wanted, like you were saying, the more life has opened up and more magical things have happened, to the point where at some points it's like whatever I ask for I receive, you know and it just becomes radically wild, you know
I can agree to that too. There's been times where I've been financially burdened, and then I randomly get a check in the mail from some company says they owe me this money, and here you go. And I'm like, I
Right.
mean, I'll take it, right? Where is this from? I don't even remember this. So, I will just want to add one thing that I think about the fractal as they get smaller or spread out. I in reading about that and people's experiences and things, the fractal goes up as much as it goes down. Like you
Right.
can go back to the source of the fractal as much as you can spread out within the fractal itself. Uh, and I find that connecting to the source more so per se has allowed me to maybe work my magics a little bit easier. So,
Well, this is interesting because this is something that, you know in my life, what I found is that the muse has taken me first to the solar path, and then to the chthonic path. You know, and what I see is totally recognize what you're saying, is that it exists upon those polar extremes, and I like to think of those poles in terms of the sun and in terms of Apollo and Dionysus. Right, these are the energies of the
mhm.
sun, and Apollo represents that Apollonian power, that force that calls us to refinement, to overcoming our limits, to striving for purity. But when we take this energy, ultimately, it also embodies, Adonis. It's that energy that eventually rejects virility. It rejects life. It commits almost to suicide. It castrates itself in order to ascend to that purity of the stars. In order to go back to the wombs, you have to reject matter, right? You ultimately have to go through that transformation, and it leads to that, casting off of the virility for purity, an abandoning of the animal and of the earth. And this is, in some ways, can be a deeply negative in a thing. It's a life denial. It's a suicide, right? It's also part and partial of the cycle, though, right? And you can view both of the poles in good and shadow aspects, right? So we have that Apollonian pole, but then there's the Dionysian pole. And the Dionysian pole is that pull into the earth, into creation, into expansion and generation, right? And but this energy, it ultimately has a similar problem, right? Where it leads to that ever expansion, ever debaucherous, ever violent, ever, it doesn't build, it doesn't refine, so these energies wind up, they need to compare and they need to contrast each other. Like we need to come together and build, but then we also need that force that comes and calls us into expansion. They're like,
Hmm.
um, right. um and with the chthonic path, that it's also a descent unto death. We see this in the stories with like the Corey. She's abducted, she's pulled into the underworld, right? And then she has to break free of the underworld and be reborn. The light has to come out as the fresh shoots of spring, right? And it has to then come back to the stars. And we see that again with the goddess Estrella, right? Which is Saturnia, which is Diana, right? Which is DK, justice. And what does she do? Estrella sets herself ablaze and she rises to the stars. But we also get in Virgil, right? In what's that work? Um his Geographics, I believe, where he describes the grand prophecy that Estrella will return. She will come back down from the stars. We will call that muse back to the earth. And she will reignite Saturn's reign, bring back that Dionysian freedom and expansion and equality, you know, that break. Yeah, because what we see is, right, like I've talked about this numerous times on the channel, but in the Greek myths, you have this. They're really, when you look at the story of the sun, you see the transition of the kings. And it's really important to look at the sun in the, I get a lot of this from the Saturnalia of Macrobius. The sun in the Greco-Roman
Okay.
appears sort of, you have the Titanic sun, Helios, but leave that image to the side for a second. Instead, we're going to examine the sun as, we have the sun as Dionysus, the sun that goes into the earth. It's pulled into the earth, right? We get this in the story of Zagreus, but then he's
And see,
forced
that
to,
makes me think of like scientifically, there are different types of light that the sun does put out, and
right.
there is a specific type of wavelength or frequency of light that penetrates into the earth or radiates down into the earth. And it does what the stories say. And there are
That's so wild.
other lights that are, and then the earth re-emits that light up
Right.
as radiating back up out of it. And it's, I like it because it matches scientific theory as well, which I think is wonderful.
Absolutely. And this is often, you see even like some of these Roman writers and Greek writers themselves describe this as sort of proto-scientific theory, right? They're trying to understand how plants grow, right? The light has to go into the cave, into the darkness, into the womb of the earth, and then it is born as the fresh shoots of spring, right? So you have to have that sun in the darkness. And the sun in the darkness that is born into fresh life is Dionysus, the child to come. And in that energy is also the madness of life, the madness of youth, the power of that virility, right? But that virility, it also leads to a lot of chaos. And so what you see with this energy is it goes through a transition cycle. The Dionysian then becomes Apollonian through that magic of refinement, through striving to imitate the divine, through going through that self empowerment. It creates high art, it creates high culture, it manifests the kingdom, the city, but eventually, even that energy, it starts to stagnate, right? Because now you create rules, you create forms, you bound yourself in an order, and eventually that energy becomes decadent. It stops changing, it starts to consume itself, it starts to waste and engage in all this filth. And that's when the
Feel
energy
like
turns,
stagnation. Yeah.
yeah, that's when the energy turns Saturnian or Chronosian, and they talk about the king consuming its children. So this is the sun right before it dies. We see this in the Saturnalia, they have to bind Saturn in chains. He's held in the darkness because he's that vile force. And what do they do in the Saturnalia? They unbind him and they sacrifice him, and then he's reborn as the child to come with the solstice. So you're
Nice.
seeing that cycle of the sun here. But this is also the cycle of civilizations, of life, of people. This kind of cyclical energy, we can see it in everything. That which is above is the same as that which is below. So when you start to understand these poetic cycles, everything starts to make sense. Everything has to go through these periods, right? We start off in that wildness of youth, breaking free of death, in the power of spring. And then we come into that stagnation of winter and the calcification of old age that then demands that burning up, that bringing back of new life, right? That destruction. We have to go through that death period, that hibernation, before life can then spring again in that magic. And this is also where we get these stories of abduction, because abduction is what? It's the drawing down of the sun or the moon into the earth. We're stealing that force of virility and we're planting the seed. And that's when they're planting the seeds, these ancient people saw that as violating the earth.
Hmm.
It's when you go into these agricultural myths, it starts to make a lot more sense. And I was talking to my wife earlier, and she brought up a really interesting thing too. Is that the idea of the abductions and the rape too also has to do with perception. You're seeing that which was hidden. You're calling into life, and you're observing. And by observing something, it's a violation. It's an act of rape. And this is even true of science, right? You try to observe a quark, you fundamentally alter its dimension, because to look at something, to measure something, is a violent act. To perceive is to
Well, I
cut.
believe. I'm glad you brought up the looking at stuff, or the perceive or perception, because I believe our eyes actually draw in energy and project energy out, other than just seeing. Like, while you're looking at that quirk, you're taking energy literally from it, and that's
Right.
changing it, because
Exactly.
the energy that you're taking from it is something that it's emitting, but you're taking it, and that's how your eyes light up. That's why you see colors or whatever, or you see anything. But it's an actual taking of energy from something else just by looking at it.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. That's a good way to think about it. And you can see, right? You're taking that energy. It's a violent act. And it's an act that, if you look at something without asking, you're committing a violation. If you're trying to see that which is hidden, you're calling out of the darkness, right? New life. And so that act, drawing down the star, calling down the moon, it's an abduction. It's a rape. It's a perception. It's wild to think about it, but that's, it's also, again, it's these agricultural ideas. It's not as vile as we perceive it in our current, societal mindset. That's not to say
Right.
that aspect isn't there. Life is vile and we have to confront it in its totality. But the ancients are far more seeing this through that lens of agriculture and a perception.
And they had a lot more time of conversations and sharing,
Right.
Experiences without judgment. I've read some stories where,
Absolutely.
like, they had people that would come and be like, no, you have to tell me your dream. Like, that's the rule. Like, you had a dream on this, you have to tell us what you saw.
Right. We look at something like Homer, right? We see it in its composed, compiled form. But the reality of Homer is the conduit for an oral tradition. He didn't compose any of that. He was just someone who he's like a folk musician, right? Someone who took the time to learn the oral stories. And he may have been an amazing performer, but there's a big difference between a performer and a composer. And Homer ain't composed nothing, right? The Greek society composed it. And that's why those stories are so profound, because they come out of the aether. They come out of community, right? Out of necessity, right? They're not dictated by capital. They're not dictated by any of that. They're that raw history. And that's why in the ancient world too, it became such an important piece of media for understanding and engaging with life. Everyone would learn these songs. Everyone would have them memorized. And so you would talk about them to each other, and you would understand in reality through it. You know, the same way when we were kids, you know, everyone was obsessed and would quote The Simpsons. You know, Homer would be that, the ancient generation. But we also see this though in like the mimetic processes, right? Like when the philosophers took over and they started to suppress the study of myth, they lost also all of this you know, magical tradition, because the myth would become part and parcel of your daily life. Like we hear stories about all these workers who would sing different aspects of the songs while they're performing different tasks. And this is how you
Hmm.
know how to perform the task, right? And
Right.
when you look at the stories, a lot of that is still contained within the myth. The myth operates on multiple levels. On one level, it
And
is a navigation map. On another level, it's telling you how to do blacksmithing. You know, like it's giving you all of this stuff because all of the society needed that information to be there.
it helped pass it along. I also think
Exactly.
that it affected the work directly. Um,
Right.
while you're singing this song, like and these vibrations and frequencies are going into the work that you're doing and kind of making it quote unquote slightly magical as far as your thoughts, emotion, feelings coming out through those vibrations and then being absorbed by you know your whatever you're doing, blacksmithing or stump or smashing grapes down so you can make wine. I think that all that added into it. Whereas now we're just like, oh, you take this chemical, add it with this chemical, and you get that. Well, that's nice and well, but and it does work every time with that procedure, yes, but there's an essence of something that is lost because it's not
Right.
being done in this more complete way, as I would put it.
I remember I can't remember, it was a long time ago, but I saw this really interesting documentary where they were looking at these traditional African weavers, and it was these women who would get together and they would make these incredibly intricate blankets and carpets, and they would all do it through song patterns, and they would like know
Oh,
what
wow.
knots to use, and they had their whole communication, and they would, the way they describe it, it was like the singing and the playing of the game made the whole process bearable, because you got to think like making some of these rugs, you're going to be putting in 1,200 hours, you're doing the most
Right.
meticulous work imaginable, and you have to memorize all these different things. But if you're all in a sync and you're singing together, you've now turned it into a game. You know, it becomes a fun pastime, and it almost becomes,
Yeah.
when you turn, you know, as a musician, I recognize this just intrinsically. Once you start doing things to a musical pattern and you start singing it, it becomes second nature. You can repeat that task ad infinitum. You know, it's
Hmm.
just, it's now,
Definitely.
you know, it's now become rote, you know? And so there's a power in all this. And we've lost a lot of that kind of learning, that learning style, you know? And, you know, the ancients, they had these incredible memories and these memory systems. That's the other thing we see in these myths, right? And we know this from the magical tradition. You've described this a bit, but you have to construct within yourself these kind of magical worlds. You have to build what they call the temple, or the, you know, that inner realm of peace where you can go and feel secure in yourself and play in your imagination. Well, the ancients are being taught this as children, and they're using these memory palaces to memorize huge swaths of songs, all things about their society, you know, and to encode that inside themselves, right? And this is something that the vast majority of us have lost, or have nothing, have no way of even understanding or relating to, you know?
Definitely. And it was, dare I say, fun, which made it easy to memorize these huge swaths of information. Um,
Right.
and stuff that I've been reading, like some of the older medical texts and stories about them, how, like apprentices needed to learn or commit to memory books that are on my shelf that, I mean, I could roughly tell you where in the book to find the information, but to have an entire set of three books, 1,000 pages apiece, committed completely to memory, I don't think I could do that now.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's a skill you got to develop in early child, you know, like in your childhood, and then you got to practice it to maintain it. right? Like that's heavy
Definitely.
stuff. But it doesn't
Right.
mean that people can't do it. But that's why we've lost these skills, because it takes that kind of extraordinary discipline. And unless you're really pressuring people, like I also remember reading just about like medieval education. You know, a lot of these people, they're fluent in Latin, they're fluent in Greek, they're fluent in English. You know, they got to learn three
Hmm.
languages, and they're learning them all at the same time, and then they're having to
Definitely.
do handwriting, and not just hand, like they got to do cursive and regular, and then they got to learn shorthand. And these are all like three different like language. You know, like to be an academic in the
Hmm.
past was ridiculous. You know.
Some of the stories I read, it seems like that was their main task or focus. Like even
Right.
as children, I mean, they might have had some side chores and stuff, but mainly
Yes.
they were you're doing this for so long, and then that's your day. Like that's what you've
Yep.
done, and now the rest of the day is yours. And then you come back, and it's not, oh, we're going to change it and have you do a little bit of this or that. No, it's the same thing, repetitive until you've got it all committed to memory. You know everything they want you to know.
Part of this is because back then we had the monastic class, we had the educated class, where that's what you did, like you just described. You know, the people who were engaging this, they did it from childhood and they did it for their whole lives, and they had
Hmm.
support from a system that allowed for this. You know, nowadays everyone reads and we all write, and we don't need to have a scribe class who can be fluent in all these languages. You know, in the same way, it's amazing. I wish I had that kind of power, but you can see why it's fallen to the wayside as well, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I
definitely.
wanted to ask you, you had mentioned earlier, you brought up your druidry, and you know that you're kind of an informal druid and you follow your own path. What's your experience in druidry? How did you get into it, and what does being a practicing druid mean to you?
Um, well, for me, it's just following what I would call my lady, and I feel drawn to some places more so than others. And I go to those spots, and it's always like just intense calm feeling, or like the area is calming, or the air is magical in that area to me. Um, and then I'll look around to try to build or make some type of what I would call a shrine of some sort, from materials that I could find locally. I posted a picture recently about when I went out and rebuilt yesterday. Those materials I picked up through several different forests across the eastern seaboard, and I just found them and was like, "Oh, I'm going to need this later." Why? Why do you know? This is me talking to myself. Why are you going to need this later? No idea, but I know I'm going to need it, so I just take it with me. And then I'm like, "Oh, I could do this, and I have all the stuff. It's right here already," which is insanely odd, right? They're like, how do I know I was going to need that? And then I talked myself into just taking it anyways. Um, when it's not anything, you know, some bones here, turtle shell there, skull here or there, deer skull, um, feathers, or certain plants or fruits, and not all of them are edible or anything like that. When it comes to the plants, some of them are highly toxic. One of them I picked, I was like, gonna need this, or this could be useful. I had no idea why. It was a pretty plant. I picked it. I didn't take everything. I try to be a mindful of harvesting all of a certain plant in one area, and I don't want to like remove it from the area. So I try to only take a little bit. But that the particular plant I'm talking about ended up being a plant that the Native Americans would use for controlling menstrual cycles. And at that time, my daughter was really going through it, and I didn't know anything about what. Not that I've even given this stuff to her, but it was just weird that I was drawn to this plant, and I was like, I need this, and I didn't know why. And then when I started looking it up, I'm like, oh, that makes sense why I was drawn to it, because my daughter was going through some things, and had I known how to work with that plant, I might have been able to help her with that plant. But obviously, I
Right,
didn't. So obviously, I didn't. But
right,
always be mindful of plants that you pick, because that particular plant, if you use too much, it can actually be deadly. So, but it was like a
absolutely.
rite of passage for the Native American women who used to use it. Uh, would go
Oh,
out and
that's
find that
cool.
plant.
Yeah, so it sounds like to me that you really, you know, that's the Muse pass. you're walking the path of the muse. You're connected to, that inner goddess, that personal spirit, and you follow the signs and the synchronicities, and you walk your own path. I guess
It's
in
the
some
only
way
way I
it's
can.
it's it's druidic in the sense that you're inspired by druidic things.
And
Right?
I
But
just, I don't know. I
yeah.
tried to read a lot about Druidism and read about modern Druids and stuff like that, and modern orders of Druids, and it didn't. It just seems off because everybody wants you to pay. Everybody wants you. Well, after 6 years of paying me $50 a month, then I'll give you a little scrap of information that you might find useful, or maybe you don't even know what it means, or don't think it's useful at all. I'm just unwilling to pay for my spiritual beliefs. So.
No, no, I totally, this is a huge issue that you bring up. That's a massive problem within the occult magical community in general. You have these elitist communities that demand payment, that demand submission, that want you, they offer. I mean, on one hand, I get it, right? Like they're offering, the whole thing of those kind of magical orders, especially ones that have sort of like a master or a guru, right? They're
Hmm.
offering you a specific kind of experience. And in order to obtain that experience, you have to follow a specific line of teaching. But that kind of
Hmm.
stuff, right? It's designed, you know, personally, what I'm interested in is knowing the self, right?
Yeah.
That path is taking you away from the self. It's trying to force you to have the experience of another person. you know I had a profound just revelation one day. I had been very, I went through religion studies and was deeply interested in Indian philosophy and spent a long time studying like Buddhism and Hinduism, and was really into a lot of those enlightenment beliefs for a long time, especially connected to Buddhism. And I used to do a lot of heavy, 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 heavy meditation. And I remember one time just having being in the deep meditation and being like, it is impossible for me to have even remotely an experience like the Buddha. It's impossible for me to recognize, like I am an entirely different person existing in an entirely different place and time. I don't believe we can
Circumstances and
have
everything. Yeah.
exactly. I don't believe that we can have, these kind of universal enlightenment experiences. I just fundamentally reject. That's not to say that you can't embrace the unity, but to try and follow another person's path, to live according to another person's rules and experiences, to bind yourself to this in the hopes of having the experience that they've relayed to you and the way they've relayed it, that just seems, you know, insane. It seems like
I mean,
the
even
exact
if,
opposite of what you should do.
right, even if you had the exact same, you know, path. I mean, just your I would think that your perception of it would be ever so slightly different, which changes it. So then it's not the exact same path. No matter what you do, you can't walk that exact same path
No,
and
exactly.
get
And
those
so
exact.
many, and so many of these guru kind of traditions, these master type traditions, they're like, do what I do, follow, study what I'm telling you, adopt the methods that I'm adopting, abandon those other beliefs, right? And that, I get it. I get why. But at the same time, it's like, no, I've lived a full life of experience. I've developed and cultivated these understandings. What I recognize is I need to do this for myself. So many of those magical orders, it's about like empowering someone else, is what I feel, and it gets into
And
that
that's what I
culty
share.
weirdness, you know?
I try to share what I experience and through my stories or my little adventures out in the woods and stuff like that, but not to walk my path or do what I do. Hopefully, if it sparks one person to safely go out into the woods and have their own experience, then that's what I aim for, really.
Right?
Not
That's the,
to.
the that's the big difference, right? In the muse kind of path that we're walking, it's all about that individual reception of reality and trusting in your own intuition and going through what
Mhm.
works for you, and embracing that personal gnosis, like you're going to experience reality through your own, you have your own lessons, your own karma, your own dharma, your own life to live, and all of its infinite complexity, right? Who am I to
Right.
talk about your path who am I to judge or to, like, I got to be focused on my own shit. That doesn't mean that we can't.
Right.
There's what it is like part of that knowing of the self is knowing nature, and is sharing in the experience, is telling our stories. I think that's fundamental, right? We're meant
Me
to
too.
be here to tell our stories, to share them with each other. Every experience is unique and beautiful and meant to be a part of that infinite whole, right? Otherwise it's not whole. And we're here
Right.
to be in that play and to share, right? you know I may not relate fully, but there are ways in which I can relate. But there's a big difference between relating to someone and imitating someone. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Right.
Um,
And like, I see this too in the magical world where people get bound by like, the grimoire tradition. We had discussed this where people want,
we did.
like, we want people to do, the grimoires like, do this, do that, say this at this time, and do this with this thing, and then you'll achieve this result, and ultimately,
Never worked for
though,
me.
yeah. Well, ultimately, I think with a lot of those stuff is that like when I've got it to work for me, um, first off, most of that stuff I'm avoiding like the plague. I'm very, particular in any kind of magic I'm playing with. But when I have
Yeah.
dabbled in that kind of a magic, what I've had to do is adapt it. I've had to adapt it. I
Exactly.
can't,
Yeah.
I'm not following these things as written. I'm tailoring, I'm inspired by how it is written, and I'm using many of those correspondences. But what I found, is like you get some people who obsess over things. They're like, I need ancient papyrus, I need the skin of a black goat, right? I need to, I need like, I can't do the spell with all this stuff. And I'm just like, why? you know
There are many things that are symbolically the same.
yeah,
So, I
you can
mean,
put in a
countless
stand
things.
in, right? You can put in a stand-in, and there's magic in that. And you see this in the myths themselves. Like I'm immediately thinking of one of the stories I sent you was the Life of Numa, and there's a part in the Life of Numa where Zeus demands human sacrifice. So Numa, he goes to his muse. He's like, I don't want to kill anyone. I don't want to do. And the muse goes, give him the fresh shoots of onions. And Zeus accepts onions in place of heads, in place of sacrifice. They don't tell him that they say, take the onions, say it's a human sacrifice, give him the onions, he'll be satisfied.
Sounds like something
And
I
I'm
would
like,
do. I'm like, I'm not gonna sacrifice that goat. I'll shave all the fur off of it, and we'll burn the fur. How about
right.
that?
But there's interesting stuff there. I don't know. But I think like, so much of these magical spells is about in connecting, it's about connecting ideas in our brain. And it's about connecting and communicating with the energies around us, right? Connecting to that, whatever entity you're trying to commune with. So it's, you know, you were talking about when we were talking about this, how you got in contact with the muse. So, and this is one thing I really wanted to talk to you about with is
Okay.
how you get into that. So many people are looking, right? They're going to these grimoires because they want to contact the spirits. They want to engage in the dream. Um, so how do you do that? And what do you find most effective? You know?
Well, for me, it's about that song that I heard, and wasn't something that initially I was aware of. Um, I started thinking about. I started having these thoughts that there was something like the sound of that baking frying was kind of like a static as well, and I thought that there was something buried in that static. And then meditating on that static and diving into it mentally in my imagination, I came across this song of these ladies' voices singing, and I try to remember that and connect back to that, and then that's when things, like I said, start to get weird or magical even. Um, Singing while I'm doing it in a meditative state, I don't think for me the song really matters. It has to be something that I enjoy or something that I think is beautiful, or as beautiful as I can produce, to be as equivalent to what I remember hearing, or and studying through that noise I heard in my mind during these 3 episodes of heavy headaches. Um, and then things, like I said, happen, or sometimes without, well, there was one place in particular that I go that I feel like is kind of sacred to me, and that's where I first um, saw what I would call my Lady of the Forest. Um, and I can go there and meditate on that, what I heard, and or sing, and it's everything becomes surreal in that moment, and I can walk the trails doing it, and everything is eerily surreal, like it's not real, like I'm in some other place, and the light changes, the light, I don't know, it gets kind of more dim or grayish, kind of like, and I've been reading up on that and through some of the materials that people have shared, that you have shared, and it's like the veil is what's laminar spaces, is that
Yeah,
the
liminal
correct term?
space.
Am I saying
Yeah, you're
liminal
crossing
space?
the threshold. You're in that liminal space where you're still in the physical world, but you're seeing beyond the veil. You're seeing into that like underworld realm, right? Or into, it could be multiple realms, but when you're because when you enter into that crossroads, right? This is why the Greeks are so obsessed with the crossroads. That's that point where all of these dimensions intersect, and that's where you get into that Hermes Hecadic kind of magic, the Janus magic, you know, because that's where you can really bend and shape things. You can influence the various streams of thought and
And
consciousness.
that's how it feels in the moment, really. Like, I
Mhm.
mean, there's a connection there, and I feel like I could do anything, even stop time, or anything in that moment, at least for limited area around me. As far as I think that would go, as far as my electromagnetic field of my body, however large that is at the time. Um,
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah,
I've never seen her anywhere else other than that spot, but I have like the surrealness and the graying out of everything. That's what kind of freaked me out a little bit yesterday when I was in my little spot fixing my shrine. Everything got like that, and I was taking so many pictures trying to, is it fog? Is it this? And then I finally got some fog, and because I was like, felt like the fog was leading me into the woods, because I'm like, oh, there's fog, I'll go that way. And then I get there and there's no fog. But I know I saw fog down that path. But when I got down there, there was no fog. And it was
oh,
further on, like pulling me deeper into the woods. And
oh
I
wow,
try to be safe, and I definitely carry everything I would need in an emergency situation with me just in case. Um, and it's never backfired. Well, one time I feel like the spirit of a particular forest got mad at me for, because the whole reason I went in there was to find goodies that I could get instead of just going in to be with the forest, and turned me around, had me second guessing myself being lost. My ego flared, and I was like, no, I'm not lost. There's my boot print. But it wasn't even on my way back out after I'd already, quote unquote, surrendered myself to the forest. I'm sorry, please. And then I asked the dragonfly to lead me out, and it did. I swear, it flew up the path, and I would catch up to it, and it would fly again, and I'd catch up to it, and it led me right back out of the woods. At
that's
that
beautiful.
point, I passed that same boot print, and it wasn't a boot print because my footprint was right next to it, and I'm like, that's not it. How did I think that was a? My ego was so in control that I couldn't even see that I was lost in the woods.
Oh wow, 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 wow. The woods didn't want you going in there and taking stuff without asking.
Exactly,
That's a powerful
exactly,
story.
and without being respectful.
Right. So when you go and you meet your Lady of the Woods, have you ever seen any other spirits in the woods there with you?
Um, Seen,
Or
no.
connected to?
Heard, yes. Connected to, not really. Sometimes I think the Fae have been around messing with me a little bit. Maybe just observing and plus messing with me a little bit because that's what typically they
Yeah.
would do. But
Well,
I've
that's
had
why
one
I ask,
instance
is
where
when
I
you
was,
cross the veil, they tend to come around and fuck with you, you know.
yeah,
And if you hang out
there
too
was,
long in those liminal spaces, that's their realm, you know.
and if you're not respectful, then you get lost in the woods forever.
Exactly.
Um,
Absolutely.
there was one instance in Virginia where I started looking into what I heard and what I saw, and the first thing that happened that I saw matches the Native American myths of the Whistler, is what I guess in translation what we call it from translating the myths or listening to the stories, um, where you would hear a whistle, and that's why they say in Appalachia you shouldn't whistle in the woods because that brings out the spirits, and they call them bad spirits or evil spirits. I don't think they're bad or evil because, well, maybe, but you have to be aware. Like I felt like I was being drawn down a certain path, and I was like, nope, that's dangerous. I'm not going that way. No way. But I had a whistle back at me for like 2 hours, and it sounded really far away. So I kept whistling louder, like I'm over here, and then it stayed the same tone. But reading through the myth, when you're being followed by a whistler, it'll throw its voice and make it sound far away. So you'll keep whistling so it can triangulate and get closer to you. And then when the sound sounds close, that's when you're done. That's when it's getting ready to grab you. Um, Later on in that same adventure, I don't know what it was. It was something very big, shaking the tops of some, I don't know, probably 10 to 12 foot tall trees, um, and snorting loudly. I mean, like very loudly, louder than I've heard a horse snort or pant. And I just threw my hands up in the air, was like, I mean you no harm. And the tree shook again, and the snorting sound happened again, and I just started backing off. Then it stopped, so I turned around and I left immediately. I was like, "Up, it's telling me you're not welcome any further.
Wow.
Ain't gonna tell me twice." Not in
That's some
that
interesting
situation.
stuff. Love it. Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, the spirits are interesting. In my limited experience, I've never met any spirits that were truly malevolent. Like, you hear I think a lot of those really malevolent stories are, people are desecrating things, or they're Christian propaganda. That's not to say that all spirits are good, far from it. But I find with a lot of these energies, like people are always in this panic mode, and I'm like, it's over things like demons and whatnot. It's like, you got to invite the spirit in. You got to take the time and adore it. You gotta cultivate. It's not just gonna come and possess you. It's not just gonna come and haunt you. You're not just gonna wake up one day and have this demonic force in your face.
You have to you Yeah, you'd have to have done something to make it act that way or respond to
Right?
you in that way.
Exactly. I look at some, you can see people who are possessed, but these are people who have, like, they wanted that, and they went out and searched for it. You know, it's not something that you're just going to stumble upon, is my point. And like you were saying, like if you're going into these woods, you're going into these sacred places, as long as you're respectful and you trust your intuition and you leave, there's nothing to worry about, you know?
Yeah. I know someone who was messing with a dark, quote unquote, grimoire, and
Mm,
then they started having all these horrible things happening in their lives, even with outside of their interpersonal relationship with their wife and other things. And I was just kind of observing the conversation, and then it was spoke about in some chats. I was just there listening, and finally I offered my advice. I was like, the only way you can, because they were trying to get rid of this book, but they couldn't get rid of it. Like they couldn't bring themselves to get rid of it, and couldn't. And it just kept finding its way back somehow. Like I put it in the garage, now it's somehow in my living room again. And
mm,
who knows? It could have. I'm not saying the book moved. There's all kinds of times where you don't remember doing things, and that's kind of scary in itself. And my advice was to use some of their reproductive fluids of both of him and his wife to seal the book with a strap around it, and then they could safely get rid of it. I hope that's what they did. I'm not sure, but that's what the Muse told me to pass on, and that's what I did.
Wow, that'd be powerful binding magic, But you see, right? They had to go to that grimoire. They had to invite that spirit in. You gotta engage that kind of energy. And then the things with these kind of energies, they will transform you. They will do all kinds of wild stuff. But like you're gonna, you have to be in that active engagement. I don't know. I think a lot of it is also just ridiculous. Uh, avoid that kind of like.
Yeah,
Why are you wanting to? Also, a lot of that grimoire stuff. It's like you're trying to bind and force something. You're trying to scare it in the name of Yahweh. You're trying to bind it and make it do your building. You're trying to force it to be your slave. What do like in my experience, I try to look at the world as alive, and I try to learn and listen and have a conversation, and I've always found that that's how the spirits engage. If you're in that kind of like demanding energy, maybe the magic will work, but they certainly aren't doing it out of any kindness, and they're gonna
right.
revolt against you. It's like
I'm the same. I feel like a conversation is the best way. Just talk.
yeah,
Just speak,
to
Go talk to
speak
the trees. You'd be surprised on how they'll respond to just being talked to. I had one
exactly.
tree, little tiny sapling. I watched it sprout up. It was growing out of the crack of the cement in the area where I smoked at work. And one of my coworkers and friends was always there because he smoked, and he saw it too. Like eventually, and then some. Eventually, I started coming out with cups of water on hot days. Oh, here you go, little buddy. Eventually, that tree turned away from the sun and leaned into where I sat. So when I sat down, it came to me, and its leaves were completely flipped around backwards, facing me all the time. And I'm like, "You seeing this?" I'm like, "He's just mind blown." Well, then they trimmed and chopped it down. I was heartbroken, but
Wow. Yeah, that is heartbreaking that it died like that. But that's interesting. You can have these relationships with life if you're open and perceptive and you're willing to give, you know. It's just like the spirits of your home or your place. Those things like brownies will mess with your stuff. They'll take your keys, they'll steal your socks. They'll move stuff
I'm
around.
constantly in my house like, "Stop messing with me. It's no longer funny." And then I find my keys. I'm like, "Okay, I know I didn't put them in the bedroom."
If you acknowledge them and you give them a little bit of love, light a few candles, or you leave them some little cream or whatnot, then all of a sudden you're finding things. Or all of a sudden they're helping you with your work. They're helping you finish things. Then everything becomes easy. you know at least that's been my experience. And it's always this kind
Usually
of
it's
like
me.
out of the corner of my eye thing.
Yeah, and then I'll see stuff. I think I just did this the other day. I felt like I I think I posted on this one time, like you get a plane of glass, and then you have some glass where it's tapered down on the edge, so that like it has this little part of the glass that reflects differently than the main part of the pane, and that's where I'll see things in, like on these edges of the glass that's got a slightly different reflective angle than the main part of the glass. And it happened. Where I saw someone out of the corner of my eye in this in the slanted pane of glass here on my table walk right past. Like I was like, okay, no car drove by, so it wasn't the lights coming through the windows. Nothing's happening on the TV. So I just reach over and like clear off a spot on the couch, pat it, and like have a seat. Let's hang out. And then yeah, I have this. Sometimes I feel like there's a presence that does sit down, and other times strange things just stop. And I'm like, oh, I had a seat. Or would you like a cup of coffee, tea, water? It's all I got, but you're more than welcome to some.
That's wild. That's wild. That's such an interesting experience. I haven't had something like that. Well, I've had these feelings of like those kind of energies and presences, but mostly when I'm meditating. And it feels like more personal, like within my own experience or within my body rather than external a lot of the time. Or sometimes when I'm in the deep meditation, it's hard to, the things start to break down and I experience everything as the self, you know. And what I love to do, like at my parents' house, they have a sauna, and I like to go into the sauna and turn off all the lights and meditate in the extreme heat, but in the dark. And I'll just let
Ooh,
my
that'd be
mind
nice.
wander. And several times, I'll, you know, one of the things I love to do is compose poetry. And what I started to recognize that I could do is that I could channel these kind of energies. So I'm like, oh, and some energies are more inspiring than others. But like one time, I was thinking about the god Pan. Oh, I want to write a poem about the god Pan, and the poem just came into me, and I literally like got up and started dancing, started and just chanted
Nice,
it, and it's just like
nice.
instant. And that was like one of the most wild experiences, like a full song idea complete with in just a moment. And it felt like that's not me, you know. I had nothing to do with that. And that's just such a wild
That's
thing. And I
awesome.
know many artists experience this to various degrees, but you know, it's something that I experience all the time. One thing I try to do is like, you know, I do body percussion, and the body percussion is born out of the magical practice. Because what I found is like with you with the song, one of the ways that I can really engage is by going into these kind of trance states, and so I start doing the body percussion, and then what ends up happening is it becomes a conversation. I'm no longer performing; the muse is performing with me, and I'm just along for the ride. And that's always an interesting kind of experience and something that's so impossible to explain, you know. But people who are into dance tend to know what I'm talking about, you know, or get into going to concerts and stuff. You
Yeah.
see this in a lot of like more African or Caribbean religions as well. They have that enthusiasm through that drum beat and
And
dance.
it's a total trance state. I mean, and even when I'm doing what I'm doing, it's might not be a trance state as far as where, I'm completely unaware of what's going on around me, but it's
Well, I'm
it's
not
even a
fully
mild
unaware,
trance
but
state.
you know what I mean. It's like
Yeah,
you're
yeah, I'm
not
just trying to
conscious.
explain.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just trying to maybe explain that out after I, said that same thing because it's like I'm aware of what's going around, but that's like it's like background noise, and then it drowns itself out after a while. And then even though your mind is still keeping track of it somewhere, you're not consciously, you're doing what you're doing, and you're into whatever it is that you're
You
using
know,
that's putting you into that state.
you know what? It's almost like if you were to be on a mushroom trip, you know, but not quite. Because where
Yeah,
where like your reality is starting to break down, and you're seeing there's that kind of weird thing, but you're still present, in the self. But if you were to sit for a moment,
definitely.
all of a sudden everything opens up, I don't know. At least that's how I've experienced it, you know. Yeah.
Nice.
Have you ever engaged in the entheogenic path or have any experiences with the entheogenic path?
Um, Explain it a little bit.
Well, like, theogenic plant is using of psychedelic herbs and different plants in order to
I
have,
have like,
magical experiences. So the most common would be, cannabis, mushrooms. But people do, every plant you can think of and every chemical you can think of. I've,
I've had I've had a lot with cannabis. Not that I was using it for that specific reason. It just happened to be in the same time. I can't
mm,
clearly say if it was the plant, but definitely it seems like it's a little easier for me. There was one experience where I became surrounded by robins. Like my backyard is, my house is shorter than both my neighbors, so my backyard's a little longer. But they had lined my back porch, both of the neighbors' houses down the side, and the power lines. So I was sitting almost in a box of robins that were all chirping, and then I was smoking cannabis. It became like this um, trance-like tone, like, because I started focusing in on each chirp, and then it was just chirping down the line, and it was all chirping at once. So then I was gone. I was out of my body. I can't like completely still aware, but my mind was gone. Like I
It was
was
else.
with the bird. Yeah,
That's
I was with the
amazing.
birds doing fairy stuff. And then robins have been bringing me gifts ever since. I used to have little pine twigs piled up. It's like they would come and drop a pine twig, look at me, I would seriously be like, okay, you can hunt in my yard. It's okay. And then they'd go and find a worm and fly off. Uh, then I
That's
started asking them to
beautiful.
bring berries and seeds and drop them in my yard. And then the mock strawberries that grow in my backyard started spreading like crazy. I started getting ground ivies popping up. Other kinds of small flowers started popping up in my yard. So I'm like, yeah, if you can hunt all the worms you want here, just bring a seed and leave it and take a worm. And I think that's what they've been doing.
That's so beautiful. You asked and you got this grand reciprocal relationship. That's so cool. How interesting.
Apparently, my yard
Yeah.
is full of worms.
I
But
mean,
there
I
is a
don't doubt
giant
it.
mushroom growing under the ground. I have
I
a
did see
mushroom
those
ring in my
pictures of
backyard.
your I did see the pictures of your fairy ring. That was pretty ridiculous. It made me think,
It's
made
only
me
gotten
worry for
bigger
you at
since I
first because
laid
I
in
was
it.
like, do you think there could be like an issue in your backyard, like sewage or something, or a dead thing? Because when I
When I
think of
first
fairy
moved
rings like
in,
that, I go, I don't know. Go ahead, sorry.
well, they did just fix because a lot of people on this street and throughout the town I live in have had like drainage problems and backup problems with sewage, but I have never had that problem. Not at all. I've never had any of that. Um, when I first moved in, the mushroom ring was really small and it was actually over in my neighbor's yard. And then it started slowly drifting and it came into my yard and it got big enough that I could lay down in it and be inside of it, almost tip of my heel to the top of my head. And
That's
after
so wild.
that, it started growing and I communed with it. Like I was trying to project my energy down into the ground for this mushroom. And then it's over the next 2 years, it's tripled in size and it's still in my yard.
Oh wow, that's incredible. So one thing I still wanted to ask you about, we haven't had a chance to yet, is alchemy. So this is something I've seen that you're like super interested in. When I
Yeah.
understand alchemy, I've always approached it from an allegorical, metaphorical kind of standpoint, where transmuting to gold. But you're really invested, like you're trying to create sealed earth. Can you talk about your understanding of the alchemical path and what you're doing? What is sealed earth all about?
Um, well, sealed earth there's many different types. Almost all cultures have them or had them or still use them to this day. Hold on, my phone's dying.
No worries.
Like there's some things made with kale and we'll just say I know a place, China, where they take this kale in and add stuff to it, and it's given to babies who are teething because it's completely edible. There's nothing wrong with it. It's basically like if you were to eat a whole bunch of chalk, like neutral chalk, and they give it to babies and it helps them while they're teething. Um, there's a bunch from ancient India, and I can't pronounce the word correctly. Avardic medicines.
Ayurvedic,
Um,
Ayurvedic, yeah, Ayurvedic
yeah,
medicine.
and there are many. Most of them are from Western civilizations, so which leads me to think that maybe the tradition started with the ancient sealed earths out of Greece, Egypt, and Mesopotamia, and then were probably traded east, and then they developed or copied it. Oh, or
So what are these
that
used
sounds
for?
horrible, but all different kinds of things. Traditionally, uh, just a general body feel good, like a general um, well being, like antibacterial, antifungal, antiviral type of a thing. Some were cured poison, some cured different types of bowel diseases. And then a lot of them, or at least one in the ones in particular, are used as ingredients in much of ancient Greek and Roman medicines, for sure. Um, Even recently, some text that I had gotten, and in pursuit of this, almost every recipe in the book, one of the ingredients is sealed earth of some type. Um, Even with making gemstones through alchemy, they were like, "Oh, you use this particular sealed earth," and I start looking at it, and I'm like, "Well, that makes sense to make it that way with that particular sealed earth, because that sealed earth has these mineral chemicals in it, and those mineral chemicals make up that gemstone. So that would
Right.
make sense why you would start with that as a base." Um, I'm more interested in it for the medical properties, because I feel like the more people know, and I'm working towards producing one. I don't think I got it quite right yet, because it's coming more like almost like a gummy versus more of a like actual hardened sealed earth. And the one that I did make that dried to a hardness, it no longer dissolves. So that doesn't match a lot of the descriptions either. Um, Delicious. I don't No sugar in it, but it's like the fruitiest, sweetest thing I've put in my mouth recently. So it's very good.
What are you
Um,
making these things out of?
well, the first one that was really sweet, it's just the earth and myrrh. That's all it is, and the algae. Like the algae is the biggest part of it, um, because I've chosen a spirogyra algae, which is more like your filamentous or your angel hair type algae you see like in the water just waving around. I collected water from a stream in the forest in a place that I go, because I seen one growing on top of some white clay, with some reds and purplish looking clays around. And I just put the jar down next to it and let the water flow into the jar and push some of the algae in. Skeptical whether it even was in there or not. And I started working with it after testing it. It just tests like a balanced mineral water, mineral electrolyte solution. Um, and it wasn't until I had my first algae bloom that I could look at under a microscope and confirm that it was there. I did grow crystals in one experiment with it. I still got to send those crystals out to see exactly what they are. Have to send them out for spectrometry testing. Um, I have them in a little baggie. It was the weirdest thing, because if it's what I think they are, they only form around like hydrothermal vents. But I made some in a flask in my basement with some algae. So
That's so
right,
interesting.
but I think the algae is the key to the sealed earth, because what it'll do is it'll levitate everything down, break it down into smaller particles, um, and then it will reorganize and restructure um, those particles for its own needs. And then if you put and those structures are called flocks, and those flocks are precursors to Dori esters, and Dori esters are precursors to RNA, which is a precursor to DNA.
Right.
And I think that that's what really makes it work. I just got to figure out the right combinations and when to add certain things at the right times, to make it work. But I did stumble across it. I can't find anywhere online that lists it as, or any research that can show me that someone's doing it that way or differently faster. But I've been able to trigger a full algae bloom in a flask in 9 minutes, which is unheard of. I even asked AI why this is happening. They're like, nope, you're imagining it. And then I posted pictures to the AI. Well, here's what it is under a microscope. And I know that that's an algae zygospore and that's an algae filament. And I drew arrows on the picture. And even finally, AI broke down and was like, you're right. That's what it is. And I was like, okay, I already knew, but I just, wanted to
Gosh.
try and
But
see if there was
it's still
anything out there
impossible.
that it could find. Yeah, but it's still impossible. That's what it is, but that's impossible. So, AI is never going to tell you you're lying to me, but
No, but it will
I just,
say that you're wrong and will refuse to
yeah,
go forward. Yeah.
yeah, but I forced it to tell me I was right, because I'm like, tell me I'm wrong. You can't prove me wrong. Unless I'm lying to you, set that aside. You can't disprove it. And then finally it's like, yep, you're right. That's what it is. But
that's fun.
and it's not every, and I use honey of all things to make that happen. And it's not every honey. Certain honeys trigger smaller aggregate blooms, and then other honeys, like the sumac derived honey, that's the 9-minute trigger. The algae I'm working with loves the sumac derived honey. It just 9 minutes, it blooms. The other honeys I use with the same, it's not as much, or it's a tiny bloom, or it's what they call an aggregate bloom, where it's just forcing the algae particles that's in the solution to bind together into small little clumps, but it's not actually a bloom. They're just joining together, which technically that's kind of what a bloom is, but it's separately, because when it blooms, there's an explosion of mass, and it's a visible like expansion of mass. And as you're watching it, if you were to see both of them happening at the same time beside each other, you would be like, oh, okay, that's an aggregate and that's a bloom. Gotcha.
Okay.
Which I think that's amazing, just to stumble across that. And maybe that is why honey is so prevalent in a lot of ancient medicines, because it triggers the algae. And it almost left out why the algae is important, because a lot of people nowadays, or modern times, talk about bacteria and microbes and this and that. Yes, those will do certain things that are similar or the exact same thing, but they can produce dangerous toxins or have dangerous side effects. And why the algae will do it in the absence of bacteria or microbes. I think it's kind of funny, because the algae is a little bit lazy. If there's bacteria around, it will release enzymes that trigger the bacteria to do all the work. But if there's no bacteria around, it will release enzymes that do the work the bacteria would be doing. It'll do it for itself, but there's nothing else around that it can trigger to do it, which is funny and exciting all at the same time. But that's been my experience in working with Spirogyra algae so far.
So interesting. So do you think you're close to having a synthesized sealed earth that you think would be suitable for use in these medicines?
Oh, definitely. I have one right here that just happens to be here. Let's see if I can show you on camera. This is my first take on a medicated. Let's see, where's my camera?
There we go. Interesting.
Yeah. And it really, like, it's a colloid and it's squishy, but there's no sugar in this. There's no normal colloid materials in this. So I made this in the absence of all that. It's actually tree barks, myrrh, frankincense, a pinch of salt, and then the algae solution. And I made a colloid.
Interesting.
Super sticky at first, but it starts to dry up. I didn't want to force it to dry any further, because I didn't want to burn it. Actually, I have the other one here. The first one I did. This one is super sweet. That one has a slight hint of salt, which should be expected because it has this tiniest little pinch of salt in it. But here's the first one I did.
Okay.
Now this one I did with the earths and clays that I collected out in the forest, and it's myrrh. It's super sweet. It's sweety and fruity. There's no sugar in it. There's nothing but white clay. It's kind of like a slightly contaminated kaolin, tree bark, myrrh bark, ground down and powdered with some elm. So.
Oh, wow.
And it's delicious, but I didn't put anything in it that would normally make it taste like that. It has no fruit in it. It has no sugar in it. It has no normal gelatinous something that you would buy to make Jell-O or anything like that in it. So
that's so wild. Well, that's so cool. So you're on this pursuit. You're gonna recreate the sealed earth, get it to dissolve in a potion. So now that you've got something pretty good, now your next step is to get it more like what they describe in the texts, right?
Exactly. Because that first one I showed, it actually started off more of a pink, when I
Mm.
first put it in the dish to let it air dry, and then it as it dried, it turned more of like a burnt, or I'm sorry, like a purplish reddish mahogany, and then it turned more into like a burnt mahogany. If I was to take it and spread it out thinner, it would look more red than brown, um, which is from the myrrh. And I think that if you're looking to recreate one of the red sealed earths, the myrrh is the key for that coloring. By controlling how the myrrh is extracted by the algae, then it'll change the color. I've seen from a brown to blood red to like a strawberry or watermelon type reddish pink, and then from there it goes gold, and then it loses all the color and becomes a gold. Well, in the gold, then the resins from the myrrh start to rejoin together, and it makes these little like shimmering flakes of that almost look like mica floating around in the water, but that's the resin, and it makes like this flat, thin sheet, and it's floating around inside the solution.
Oh wow,
It's
interesting.
been an awesome adventure going through all this and learning this and teaching myself these things and discovering these things. Because it's
So,
so hard to find any of the information online.
oh,
So
absolutely
hard.
right. Yeah, like most of these texts are obscure. They're probably many of them are untranslated in German or Latin or Italian. You know, um, you're gonna have to do so much digging to get into this stuff. What I want to know is once you create your sealed earth, what do you want to? Are you gonna? Are there any potions or spells or like recipes in mind? Do you have something from Galen in mind that you want to try or?
Well, I do have an idea to maybe try a theriac because a lot of the ingredients per se have been translated or described or speculated down to just a couple of what they could be. But
Right.
all of the recipes and translations, no one knows what the sealed earth was.
Hmm.
And then when a recent text that someone shared with me, it even said that that the ancients say it's algae, but they don't say what kind of algae or how they used it. And I think I've gotten that part down. Now I need to teach myself or discover how to use it in a way that the outcome is something similar to what is in written text.
Wow, that's so cool. A theriac would be wild. For those who don't know, the theriac is a magical cure-all that was said to have been created by both Medea and Mithridates. It has a storied history. In the couple surviving recipes we have are quite large and intense. I'm just thinking of all the
I
opium you're
just
going to
finished.
need. Not that you would ever do
Might
it to
not.
these quantities, right? I'm just teasing. It's
Right.
just
You know what? It might not necessarily need an opiate per se, because there
fun.
are other things that bind to opiate receptors and give the same feeling, but they're not opioids. You can
Like
find them in lots
kratom?
of different plants,
I know
like
kratom is like
kratom.
that. Yeah,
Exactly,
okay.
kratom binds to your opioid receptors, but white oak sap and red oak sap have the same opioid binders in them, and I'm sure there's many other trees that have those opioid binders in them as well. They wouldn't test as opioids if they were to go under a chemical test. They would definitely be, well, that's this, it came from this tree, but they bind to your opioid receptors and give you the same feeling without the side effects of narcotics. But they all
Mhm.
have their own dangers as well. They
Of
do.
course, of course. There's
Um,
still a natural
I mean,
compound. All natural compounds are a risk.
definitely. And I thought about, I have an idea for a theriac. It's more of a total body health, wellness, health, and health. I just finished rewriting the chapter with my new information I've learned recently. Um, and if you were to break it down, it has, I don't know, 46 ingredients, and then each ingredient has many steps to develop, which I think is wild. But I feel like to make a theriac, it can't be focused on one thing. Like if you want a theriac to cure poison, you're not just going to put in things that cure poison. You have to put the whole body into a state of harmony, and then the poison
Mhm.
will be cured because there are poison cures in it. But it won't work unless everything else that the body needs is also within that theriac. Uh,
Oh,
Personal
that's interesting.
thoughts. I've never read anything like that, but that's what it just would kind of make sense to me. Like if you want to cure something that has the potential to run through your entire system, then you should treat the entire system as one whole instead of breaking it down. Oh, we're going to treat your cardiovascular. We're going to take care of your kidneys. We're going to, well, you know, you need to treat them all at once simultaneously.
Right. Right. You have to take in the holistic person. Otherwise, you know, you run so many risks.
Side effects and side effects.
Exactly.
I just watched a
That's so
drug
much of a
commercial
problem with
earlier.
our modern medicine.
Mm-hmm. This
But go
one
ahead.
was to help with breathing. I think it was some type of, it was non-small cell lung cancer's commercial. I'm watching this treatment and I'm like, the side effects are worse than having lung cancer. Like the
Yeah.
medicine can literally kill you, and not because of your cancer. I'm like, why are you advertising this?
You know, okay, as a Canadian, that's something that always weirds me out when I'm in the States, because we don't allow, I mean, we've been, our laws have changed in the last few years as our country's gone more conservative, but especially growing up, you would never see any advertising for medication. And then you see it all over in the US, like every commercial on some of these local channels. And it's just like, it's like a nightmare stuff. Like, who's going to their doctor and say, I saw on the TV this ad. Is this a good medication? Could you recommend this to me? I'm like, what? Like, what is, you know,
Yeah,
it just
like,
seems so weird and foreign to me.
and then
You
a
know,
lot
the
of those
doctor
medications
prescribes
are
me
for
a
like,
medicine.
right. But even those medications in themselves are for this. I mean, I'm not saying they're not needed and they're not
Right, of course.
appreciated that they're working on these things, but when you look at the grand total number of people with ailments, it's like 0.00001% of people have this niche thing. Like
Right.
we haven't we haven't found a cheap cure for malaria yet. Can we focus on something that kills hundreds of millions of people worldwide? You know, and cure something, and you know, I don't know.
Oh,
That's
absolutely.
personal opinion.
Oh man, yeah. This is, you know, our capitalist system. You know, we can spend billions of dollars and develop Ozempic, but we still can't come up with, you know, cure for malaria, which is the most deadliest and common disease, just about.
Well, a
You
cheap
know,
cure. The cure they
a
have
cheap
now
cure.
is
Yes,
$240 a dose. Two hundred
right.
and forty dollars a dose. Who can?
It's
I
insane.
mean, who can afford that?
No, and when you think about it, like this impacts like a third of the planet. You know,
Hmm.
running the risk of malaria. You know, um, wild stuff. Yeah, but like, yeah, you know, the whole medical system is just insane to me. I always think about fentanyl. You know, fentanyl started out as something that was prescribed to people. You know, Prince died because a doctor prescribed him fentanyl. Like, you're giving someone addicted to
Wow.
painkillers the strongest painkiller known to man, and you're his doctor, and then you're surprised when he overdoses. Like, what? It's absurd. It's absurd. But you know, that's how a lot of this stuff started, right? Like my
And
mom is.
painkillers are very
Go ahead. I was gonna say my
painkillers
mom
are
is a
very
nurse. Sorry. Yeah.
no, go ahead. You go ahead.
You know, my mom is a PSW, and she was telling me,
Oh,
like,
nice.
you know, in her experience, you know, and she used to work in hospice care, and she was like, in her experience, fentanyl was only ever used at end of life. Like, it's way too
Ease of
powerful.
passage.
Exactly. You know, like it has a purpose. It's a powerful but you don't give this to just the average person, you know, because it's gonna rock you,
Right.
you know. And now it's in
A lot of respect for hospice nurses.
yeah, and
But
now it's
they
like,
took care of my grandfather. So.
oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, it's a beautiful job. But you know, nowadays, like how you know, like if it's terrifying. I would never purchase any illicit drugs nowadays because like there could be fentanyl in it, you know.
I mean, there could be ground up human bones in it. If you look at some of the zombie drugs that are, you know, I think they're in Northwest Africa mainly a lot right now, or these, I think it's literally called the zombie drug. They mix like all kinds of things in human remains and with cannabis and smoke it and
That's
turns people
insane.
into zombies.
That's when you get the most extreme of desperation. I remember a while back, when Russia was in a much more dire place. I saw this, it was on Vice, this documentary talking about this drug called crocodile, which was like a bunch of these
So,
like street drugs that were combined and whatnot. And what it would do. It was called crocodile because it would cause necrosis of the flesh, and people would just rot away and die. But it's just like, how desperate do you have to be that you're willing to, that you're willing to risk death and self-destruction just to be out of the situation mentally, you know?
Yeah,
Like, it's wild. It's
yeah,
wild.
definitely. And then
Yeah.
my goal really in it mostly is to try to develop it and get it written down and get it out um as in a book or something that's more what do they call that, public knowledge or public domain, so it doesn't get scooped up and then locked away, so no one can, I mean, because it sounds really hard and complicated, but I tried to make some of my recipe descriptions very easy and then just step by step. You follow this step, and then you can go through and you can make these things that could benefit you and help keep you healthy. Help. I'm not saying that anyone should ever look at towards these types of things um, instead of going to the doctor or instead of
Right.
going to a medical professional, right?
Right.
Um, but if it helps, do
Right.
both. Go see your
Yeah.
doctor and maybe tell him about it. And if he doesn't say it's going to have any weird effects with your medications, then and it's not going to hurt you, then why not?
There's something to be said about, the kind of herbal medications and whatnot and trying. You like you said, you got to just do it in conjunction with proper medical health care, and that you're not relying on this kind of stuff entirely. But there's a lot to be gained from that kind of medicine. There's a lot to be gained from living a more healthy life. And it sounds like you're maybe on the cusp of something that could be truly helpful to people. So it's interesting stuff. But we're
Definitely.
coming up
Definitely.
here almost to 2 hours. So before we end, Veldain, I wanted to ask you, is there any advice that you would give to our audience, to people who are trying to engage the magical tradition, to discover the muse, to connect to nature like you? What would you suggest to people?
I've said it before. This thing, awareness, mind, eyes, ears open. Um, and I know this will sound cliche, but know yourself, explore yourself, be brutally honest with yourself. Because how are you going to discover that method that is going to work for you, that will help you connect to the muses if you're lying to yourself or you're not being honest with yourself? And it's been my experience that while I can't prove any of it, the spirits, gods, whichever term you want to use, they know when you're lying to yourself. They
Right.
can just detect it. They just like, nope, this person is not being honest with themselves. I'm not gonna, you know, go near that with a 12-foot pole. And follow your heart. Really, follow your heart.
That's
I know that
beautiful.
sounds cliche too, but that's what works for me. I go with intuition, gut feeling, um, and following those things I already mentioned.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Veldain. I really appreciate it. This was an enlightening discussion. So much fun.
It was great.
And
Yeah, thank you for having me.
is there anything that you wanted to promote? Do you have a YouTube channel, or do you have anything like, I know that you have a bunch of your things on the Myth and Lore Discord. If people want to check out your writings, they can find them there. But is there any other place that people should go if they wish to read your work or connect
Um,
with you?
I do have a YouTube channel. I just recently um, converted my YouTube channel. Originally, I started it years ago to showcase my um, darn it, brain fart, Elder Scrolls Online gaming, but
Oh, that's
I never
fun.
really got into that too much. I mean, I took those videos down and then added a lot of the videos I've taken during my experiments with alchemy and my pursuit of sealed earth and herbal remedies um, there. And at least because there's not a lot of places where you can go and see what what happens when you take elm and add water to it. Like
Right.
you can read about it, but that's only half of the picture. Now you have to try to envision it for yourself. And I have pictures, and I didn't do a video because it turns into a colloid. It really turns into a slimy, sticky gel. But there's a picture of it there, so you can see what it looks like. Same with
That's
myrrh and linden bark and frankincense. Well, I haven't got my frankincense videos up yet, but some of that stuff. I do have a YouTube channel there, and there are links in the YouTube channel to my Substacks, where a lot of my writings can be found. And then there's links there also for the Discords that I'm active in.
So what's your
So
YouTube?
anything, it's Druid Alchemical Practice, only because Druid Alchemy was already
Druid Alchemical Practice. Okay.
Yeah. Druid Alchemy was already taken, so I had to go with my next thought.
Druid Alchemical Practice. All right. Awesome. Perfect. All right. So everyone go subscribe to our friend here, Veldain, the beautiful soul, and learn some interesting things. And when you had mentioned Elder Scrolls Online, it just reminded me something. So my wife is a big gamer, or she was really into World of Warcraft, and she had wanted me to ask you. She recognized a couple of your pictures. Are you a big WoW player?
I used to be.
Okay.
From vanilla all the way up to Wrath of the Lich King, that was my life outside of work. Right, even when I was on active duty, like people would come pull me out of the barracks. They're like, "We're going to the movies, and you don't have a choice. You're coming with us." I'm like, "Okay, I'll come."
Yeah, she thought that you were, someone kind of big in that community. That's interesting. Wild stuff. Very cool. Well, so much fun, Veldain, and we'll have to have you back to have another discussion sometime to dig into further magic in the Muse. This was a lot of fun.
Oh, awesome.
Really appreciate you. All right, everyone. Thank you, guys. Peace and love. And I will be back this evening for our regular tarot streams. And thank you, Veldain. Take care.
Have a good night.